This podcast contains our own personal views, not associated with any organisation. Coronial contains descriptions of death inquests that may be graphic and disturbing to some listeners. Discretion is advised. Okie dokie. Welcome back to Coronial, everyone. I'm Alice.
I'm Emma.
And I'm Georgie.
Today I'll be telling you about the inquest into the death of Manmeet Sharma, who died on the 28th of October 2016 when he was set on fire by a stranger.
Oh, fuck off.
His death was reportable to the coroner because it was a violent or otherwise unnatural death. The coroner also found that it was in the public interest that an inquest be held into his death, I think partly because of the amount of media coverage that there was of this case. Manmeet was 29 years old at the time of his death and was working as a bus driver for Brisbane City Council and also as a radio announcer. He had only been working as a bus driver for just over 3 months. He was also a singer and an actor and was much loved by his family and friends. On the morning of his death, Manmeet was driving his bus on Route 125 from the Garden City Shopping Centre along Beaudesert Road, Maruka to Fortitude Valley. At around 8:55am, a witness waiting for the bus noticed a man at the bus stop on Beaudesert Road at Moorvale, Maruka. He was carrying a black backpack and seemed to have his hand inside the backpack, holding something. He looked stressed and worried, pacing on the footpath and talking loudly at passers-by. At about 9am, Manmeet's bus stopped at this stop, and a number of passengers boarded, including Anthony O'Donoghue. Anthony was the one carrying the backpack, which had inside a plastic bottle filled with a mixture of diesel and petrol, with a wick inserted. He entered the bus via the front door, then lit the wick using a portable barbecue lighter, and tipped the bag and the bottle onto Manmeet, who was instantly engulfed in flames. The fire was intense and there was a large amount of smoke.
What the actual?
Why?
We'll get to why. There were 14 passengers on board the bus, including 3 children.
No!
Yep. When the fire started, they all moved towards the rear doors of the bus, which were closed at the time. The rear doors had an emergency release mechanism, but this wasn't activated. I assume because of the sheer panic that you would have when there's suddenly a fire at the front of the bus.
Yeah. I wonder if there's a trigger mechanism from the driver's perspective either.
He probably couldn't have done much.
Yeah.
In that case, I don't think it's an emergency. I think it would just be the regular button that they press to open the door. But yeah, he was not in.
Any way to do it.
No,
yeah.
he was not able to. So instead, the passengers tried to kick the doors open.
Can't imagine that went well.
Well, yes and no. So one person was able to push themselves through a small opening between the doors and helped some other passengers escape. A passing taxi driver saw the fire and stopped to help the trapped passengers. He was able to force the rear doors open, allowing all the passengers to escape. 2 passing motorists also stopped and tried to put out the fire using fire extinguishers.
Do buses have fire extinguishers on them?
Yes, there is one on board. The taxi also possibly had one.
True.
In there as well. A 000 call was received at 9:05am, and the Queensland Fire and Emergency Services arrived on scene at 9:14am. 2 firefighters entered the bus and found Manmeet to be deceased before putting out the fire.
Oh.
Because obviously the first thing they want to do is check to see if anyone needs to be rescued.
Yeah, fair.
Yeah. Most of the bus passengers stayed in the vicinity of the bus stop, including Anthony. He was treated at the scene by Queensland Ambulance Service for a burn to his lower right leg. Queensland police officers attended and established a crime scene. Several passengers identified Anthony as being the person involved in the attack, and he was spoken to by detectives. He was placed in a forensic suit with gloves before being arrested and transported to the Princess Alexandra Hospital for further treatment of his burns. He was agitated and stressed, and initially refused to speak to police.
How terrifying would that have been, being those other passengers waiting nearby, also knowing that that person has instigated it? I'd be so stressed that, further was going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh.
Yep. He was assessed by the mental health team at the hospital, including 2 psychiatrists. Police were advised that he had previously been treated for mental health issues. The bus was examined in situ after the fire. There was a small waist-height door that provided access for the driver into the driver compartment space. The driver compartment is elevated one step above the front entry floor. The driver is semi-enclosed by a moulded plastic console and dashboard. A perspex wall is fitted behind the driver's seat. Within 3 metres of the front of the bus, the ceiling damage intensified to the extent that panels had melted and dropped due to direct flame and heat impact. Fire damage was observed to the non-slip flooring material at the entry to the bus, the bottom of the front folding door, and the dashboard facing the driver's seat. Manmeet was still seated in the driver's seat, with his body partly angled towards the access door, with his knee up against the inside of the access door. His postmortem found that his cause of death was due to the effects of fire, which is
not unexpected.
Yeah. At about 5:45 p.m. on the day of the incident, Anthony was deemed medically fit to remain in police custody and was released from the hospital before being transported to the Mount Gravatt police station. He was warned and spoke to detectives about his work history and personal life. He suggested that there was a conspiracy to keep him unemployed and make his life difficult. He refused to speak directly about the fire. Anthony's unit was searched by police, where they found a plastic petrol container with a cloth in it, similar to that used in the bus attack, on the veranda, along with handwritten notes detailing bus numbers on the kitchen table. Police spoke to staff at the Services Union in South Brisbane, who advised that Anthony was there on the 23rd of August, 5 days before the attack. He was threatening and abusive, expressing the desire to get retribution against the union. He was asked to leave, then went to the nearby Electrical Trades Union office, where he also threatened and abused staff. One of his friends described him as paranoid, and that he often spoke about the workers' union being out to get him, as well as people walking on the street. He never disclosed threats to hurt other people. He did disclose previous suicide attempts as a way to rid himself of the voices he was hearing. He was formally charged with murder, attempted murder, arson, and willful damage. He was kept in custody until the 29th of January 2017, when he was transported to the Park Centre for Mental Health and assessed and treated at this facility under an involuntary treatment order.
Yeah, and the park is the name.
Yeah,
so it's not like a park.
No,
like
it's
called
the Park
the
Centre.
Park Centre.
Yep.
Yeah.
So now we're going to Anthony's mental health history, and it is extensive. From the 23rd of March to the 9th of April 2010, Anthony was in the Redlands Mental Health Unit following a suicide attempt by overdose and car crash in New South Wales. His suicidal ideation was related to paranoid delusions, related to a conspiracy associated with trade unions, which stemmed from his employment with New South Wales Rail in around 2006. He was diagnosed with delusional disorder, persecutory type, and prescribed medication. After he was discharged, he moved from Wynnum to Alderley and stopped treatment. On the 24th of August 2010, his GP wrote to the Valley Mental Health Clinic. He had stopped his medication because he felt there were significant side effects, and he had experienced little improvement. He was connected with a psychologist at Stones Corner due to chronic suicide risk. Between September and November 2010, he was repeatedly assessed and treated by the Royal Brisbane and Women's Hospital acute care team. He missed or cancelled some of these appointments. He was assessed as being psychotic with a lack of insight and was placed on medication from late October 2010. He was closed to that acute care team in November 2010 and referred to the Homeless Health Outreach team.
As in, it was closed because he was now homeless and therefore didn't fit into their catchment, or what?
It was not clear about why that happened.
Yeah, okay. 'Cause
Possibly.
I was like, I guess you have to have a... So we should mention as well, like, a lot of those names that you've mentioned are suburbs within inner city Brisbane. And so the bouncing around may be because he also moved around and that kind of thing, which I'm sure it's very hard to keep a rental when you have paranoid delusions. But then also the health facilities often accept you based on your location of your residence. So if you no longer have a residence, I don't know how you end up in a particular catchment for your healthcare. So
yeah, maybe
that's why. But
Yep.
there's no he was discharged from their care from a.
Yeah,
he no longer needed it. It was just transferred to a different service.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. From the 29th of October to the 22nd of November 2011, Anthony was admitted to the Royal Brisbane and Women's Hospital under an emergency examination order after being brought in by the police after making threats to kill public sector workers, including police, and presenting to police with a weapon fashioned from a tyre lever. He received treatment subject to an involuntary treatment order. He expressed the idea of hitting a police officer on the head, stealing his gun, before shooting the officer and himself. He also expressed the specific plan of attending the Australian Services Union on Peel Street in Brisbane and killing as many people as possible because he considered all public sector workers as fair game.
So sorry, you said at the beginning though, people expressed that he'd never actually stated about harming people?
His friend said that. So I think it's just that his friend had never heard him make these threats.
Okay.
But clearly they had happened.
Yeah. Okay.
He claimed that he would kill a family member in an instant as he blamed his problems on them. It didn't go into detail of which family member and whether he actually had contact with them or not, but it seems like he didn't. He was discharged still subject to an involuntary treatment order and lived in a hostel. He was referred for follow-up by the Homeless Health Outreach team again. In December 2011, he saw a psychiatrist from the outreach team who recorded his diagnosis as paranoid schizophrenia and noted that he was superficially settled. In 2012, he was offered psychotherapy to help manage his symptoms and distress, which he reportedly found helpful. In April 2012, he told mental health staff he had priced a handgun and had ongoing ideas to kill union officials. A community forensic outreach service risk assessment was arranged. Anthony refused to engage face-to-face with the team, so a desktop assessment was conducted, which involved a case discussion with the treating team. It was noted that it would be important to watch for any increased signs of risk, such as last resort thinking, suicidal ideation, or more specific homicidal thoughts or plans. Treatment of his psychosis was a key factor in maintaining his safety in the community. Ensuring long-term follow-up via maintaining his involuntary treatment order was considered important. It was recommended that a low threshold for readmission and reassessment be applied if his risk was considered to increase.
Did it state what was considered as an increased risk?
It didn't go into that level of detail.
Okay.
By June 2012, he was moved into a shared unit at Kedron with the assistance of the Transitional Housing Team. By November 2012, he was relocated to the Independent Subsidised Public Housing Unit in Maruka. Though his lack of insight continued, his mental state was assessed as stable. He continued to have long-standing delusions of persecution directed towards his relatives.
Okay, so he's moved on from his public service more to relatives? Or...
At this point, seemingly, yes.
Okay,
yeah.
Yep.
On the 15th of December 2012, his care was transferred to the Continuing Care West team, which was part of Metro Health South. However, his Community Forensic Outreach Service risk assessment and treatment plan were not provided to this team.
Okay. What? Okay. Yep.
Why? Good question.
Okay.
Do not know.
Okay.
It just wasn't. His treatment team included a psychiatrist, case manager, and psychologist. The case manager would conduct home visits, which included transporting him to his appointments. At the time, he was an involuntary patient and prescribed antipsychotic medication via injection every 4 weeks. It was observed that he had chronic delusions related to trade unions, and he had incorporated homicidal ideation. So the union stuff is still going.
It's still going. Yeah, okay.
Despite his delusions and his beliefs that he did not have a mental illness and did not require antipsychotic treatment, he was assessed as being a low risk. In May 2013, the psychiatrist reviewed Anthony and confirmed the diagnosis of delusional disorder. She reiterated the need for involuntary treatment and ongoing medication by way of injection.
But he's still got ongoing significant symptoms even in the context of involuntary treatment?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Or at least he's still got the delusions.
But he's still got no insight either because he doesn't
Correct.
believe he needs treatment.
Yeah, he doesn't believe he has mental illness.
Yeah, okay. And so, like, maybe it is helping. Maybe, like, his delusions would be much worse. His insight would be much worse.
Yes.
But even in that context of being involuntarily treated that they're saying he needs to maintain, it's not getting him to a functional point either that he can have insight and not have ongoing delusions.
Yeah.
That's horrendous.
In November 2013, a female neighbour contacted the housing agency where he lived with concerns about Anthony's mood and suicidal ideas. He responded angrily, suggesting she was just trying to cause trouble. In November 2013, he indicated he wished to travel to Thailand. His lack of insight continued, particularly around the need for medication and the presence of any mental illness. Arrangements were made for his medication to switch to an oral version so he could travel overseas.
No.
He still remained subject to the involuntary treatment order, and he travelled overseas in January 2014 and returned in March 2014.
But he's got no insight, and so he doesn't want to take his medication.
Yes. Yep. He was assessed again after he returned to Australia, and a lower dose of the oral antipsychotic medication was considered, even though he had ongoing delusions about unions and resistance to try rehabilitative measures. Between June 2014 and July 2015, he attended 23 sessions of psychotherapy with a psychologist, but then suddenly stopped attending.
Is that also because he'd suddenly stopped taking his medicines?
Yeah, so essentially when he was assessed later in the Park mental health facility, he said that he had told his team that he was still taking the oral antipsychotics, but he stopped.
Yeah.
Which is not, I don't think, uncommon.
Yeah.
For someone who does not believe they have a mental illness, why would they think they need to take the medication?
Yeah. And I don't know what kind of checks you can do to kind of prove that either.
Yes. And yeah, that was something the coroner said as well, is that you can't prove whether someone is taking something. And even if you did blood tests, they're not accurate enough to know. In a review on the 15th of September 2014, it was noted that he was compliant with medication and suffering from a delusional disorder, secondary chronic suicidal ideation with a stable mental state. He was assessed as being a low risk to others or self at present. On the 9th of December 2014, it was documented that he suffered from a delusional disorder which was in partial remission. On the 16th of December 2014, his involuntary treatment order was revoked.
Okay, so it appears that there is some improvement in his condition enough to no longer need involuntary.
Yes.
Still implying that he's willing to take his medication, or at least that's what he's informed.
That's what he's telling them. Yeah.
Okay.
In March 2015, it was noted that Anthony was compliant with his medication and had been attending and engaging with a psychologist. So even though he's no longer an involuntary patient, he is still engaging with this service. It was documented that he had a delusional disorder, which was in partial remission, with his chronic suicidal and homicidal ideation presenting a low risk due to his moral code. A trial to reduce his medication dose was started.
I'm interested to know what his moral code was.
Yeah, and it did not go into that at all. In June 2015, it was noted that he continued to deny any psychotic symptoms and refuted his diagnosis. He did not raise any delusional ideas or express any homicidal ideation. His medication was maintained. In October 2015, he was seen by the psychiatrist where he denied any illness and was enraged when treatment options were raised with him. He continued to express chronic persecutory delusional ideation. It was determined that he would be reviewed in 3 months' time or as needed. Consideration was to be given to discharge from the service in light of his resistance to engage in rehabilitation-focused treatment.
But
to me, that is not a reason to discharge someone from the service, because clearly he still needs help.
yeah, that's like maybe we need to go back in the involuntary direction. Yeah. He doesn't think he's got a diagnosis. He says he's taking his meds, but he's not willing to do any other treatment, and he's still got the symptoms. I don't know, I'm just trying to think of it if you put it in a non-mental health condition. It's like the diabetic who refuses to acknowledge they've got diabetes, who refuses to take their medicines, and their sugars are still out of control. I guess there's a potential that you might be like, well, you're not willing to engage, so we're not going to
force you
to have care.
Yeah.
It's so tricky.
But he's at risk of harming himself or others.
Yes. Yeah, correct. Whereas the diabetic doesn't.
Yeah.
It's going to harm themselves, but you have the autonomy to... Yeah, interesting.
Clinical notes from the first part of 2016 indicate that he had a stable mental state with ongoing chronic delusions, no insight, and relative social isolation. On the 8th of March 2016, he was reviewed again and remained ambivalent about mental health service involvement, but also expressed both anger and anxiety about being discharged from the service.
That's ironic. It's like, no, I don't need this, but keep seeing me.
But also it is actually, clearly he knew that it was helping him in some way.
Yeah, okay.
It was concluded that overall he was stable. The plan to discharge him was to continue following 2 more clinical reviews. On the 18th of April 2016, he was reviewed again and again said to be stable. Plans to discharge him from the service were to continue. On the 2nd of May 2016, Anthony was treated at an emergency department for chest pain. 3 days later, his case manager conducted a home visit. Anthony mentioned that unions would get what was coming to them, but did not elaborate further. He denied any homicidal ideation towards trade unionists. He did not appear too concerned about his upcoming discharge and was assessed as a low risk to himself and others. On the 3rd of June 2016, he presented for an unscheduled psychology appointment.
I'm here to see my psychologist now.
Yeah, he just turned up, basically. Okay. But the psychologist was able to see him.
Okay, good.
The reasons for his presentation were unclear, but it seems he felt more unsettled. There were vague paranoid themes and problems around trust and interpersonal issues. He reported ongoing suicidality. On the 14th of June 2016, Anthony did not attend the final review with his psychiatrist. It was noted that his chronic delusions had been contained by medication. And when we say contained, we mean that he was still having them, but he was not feeling as much rage when it came to those delusions.
He's still on oral and he's still being prescribed oral.
Yes.
As far as we're aware.
Yes.
Yeah.
However, he remained functionally impaired due to chronic adjustment issues, which related to a lack of insight and a denial of illness. The psychiatrist's impression was that he was likely to be experiencing difficulty with discharge. While he had refused a referral to a private psychiatrist or a GP for follow-up, he was provided with prescription for 4 to 5 months medication.
What? Wait. So it's just like, okay, goodbye, 0 further follow-up?
Yep.
No.
Yeah. So a letter was written to him confirming that since his mental health had been stable for quite some time, he no longer required treatment with the service. However, he was strongly recommended to seek alternative care through his GP, including continuation of his medication.
How was that not part of the discharge planning process to be like, we're going to start you seeing a GP and make sure you've got a regular GP that you are following up with before we let you go?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Please go on.
So they scheduled another appointment for the 26th of July 2016 because he'd missed that final review. On the 20th of July, the case manager visited Anthony at home and he voiced his intention not to attend his final appointment. In relation to unions, he again indicated that they would get what was coming to them, but did not elaborate. On the 25th of July, he was again seen at home. He again said he did not think he would attend the final appointment because he did not see the point. And I can see his reasoning there because they're just going to see him one last time to say, yep, cool, you're You're out. He did not express any concern about being discharged from the mental health service. He again refused consent for information to be given to his GP. So that was the reason that this health team gave as to why he was not transferred to a GP, is because he did not consent. The coroner, I believe, did point out that I don't believe the consent needed to be given by him.
You do have to provide a GP though, so like...
Oh, so maybe his not consenting is just not giving a name.
Yeah. You probably sign something when you go into a lot of practices now that says, you know, are you willing to give the right to any other treating health individual that we might need to send this to? But it does depend on, in theory, you should be informed of that information.
True. Yeah.
And so, yeah, therefore you would have to give consent. And so if you just provide zero name, just don't.
You just don't put the...
Yeah.
Yep. The case manager considered that he appeared to be a low risk to self and others, despite voicing chronic suicidal thoughts, but because he had no plans. On the 1st of August, Anthony was discharged from the service. On the 31st of August, he called the clinic to make an appointment with the psychiatrist, but was told that by then he had been closed to the service.
That just raises some red flags to me, though.
Yeah, he's reaching out because he wants to have an appointment with the psychiatrist, and they're telling him no. The case manager tried to return the call, but there was no answer and they didn't leave a message. The bus attack then occurred on the 28th of October that year.
And we just have nothing in between August and October?
No, nothing.
Okay.
No medical history for that time. On admission to the park in 2017, the psychiatrist who admitted him noted his long history of persecutory beliefs and delusions, as well as his lack of insight and homicidal ideation. He said that he had stopped seeing mental health services in the 3 months before the attack, quote, because of a bullshit diagnosis.
I'm so confused.
He blamed the psychiatrist from that previous care team for destroying his life, and said she had written false information in his clinical record.
Interesting.
He believed that he had been misdiagnosed with a mental illness. So this comes back to the fact that he does not think he is mentally unwell.
Yeah, but they discharged him, but somehow that still ruined his life?
Yeah. He said that he targeted Manmeet because he was driving the first bus that came along.
Yeah.
And there was some, I guess, conjecture in the media as to whether this was a racist attack. Yeah. And the coroner did find that it wasn't, based on all the information they had on Anthony's mental health. All of these delusions about the trade unions, it was to do with the fact that a bus driver was technically a public sector worker and was therefore a target. And it just so happens this was the first bus that came along.
But it said he'd been tracking buses?
He had a list of route numbers written down, so it was probably all of the buses that stopped at that stop near his house. Okay. He also didn't have a job and didn't have a car, so he was catching a lot of buses.
Right, so it's he's just tracking which buses go where so that he can get transport.
Possibly.
Okay. Yep.
Or maybe it was a list of possible targets.
Yeah.
They don't know. He had experienced delusions and auditory hallucinations for some months before the attack, including fears his computer had been hacked by trade unions. He was hearing voices in Arabic and English from his computer, even when the internet was not turned on. He believed he was under surveillance by the unions and had been receiving messages for months.
Did he know Arabic?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
He was obviously hearing a voice that he believed was speaking Arabic.
Yeah. Sorry, I was just like, was that a
well,
language
maybe
of his?
he did, actually. It didn't go into whether or not he actually did. I assume he didn't.
Yeah, okay.
On the morning of the attack, Anthony decided to make a Molotov cocktail, which he placed in his backpack along with a barbecue lighter. He felt, quote, he was losing it and just wanted all the persecution to stop. He believed that up until the last minute, someone would intervene and the persecution would stop. He said that he walked to the bus stop and became really agitated because he had not been stopped, and he was unsure what would happen next. He entered the bus and claimed that the driver was smirking at him, and he then lit the bag and lifted it. And there was actually evidence from the other passengers that Manmeet was greeting every person who came on that bus as they got on the bus.
Oh my god! So he was just literally like a really friendly guy.
Yeah, really friendly guy, just doing his job, and this
Oh,
person
so-
who had
Delusions.
untreated mental
Yeah.
illness interpreted
That,
that
a smirk.
friendliness as something that meant something.
Sarcastic.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yep. Through subsequent assessments, it became clear that Anthony's paranoid delusional thinking had affected interactions between friends and workmates since at least 2005 and led to total social isolation. He remained delusional with a lack of insight and refused various antipsychotic medications. Anthony was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, which was likely present for 10 years. The psychiatrist considered that he was deprived of the capacity to know that he ought not to do the act in relation to the alleged offences. However, he was fit for trial. She recommended that he be placed on a forensic order if he was found to be of unsound mind by the mental health court. And I believe a forensic order is where you are detained in a mental health facility.
Yeah, I feel like that
Makes
seems
sense.
necessary for him.
Yeah. So criminal charges against Anthony were referred to the mental health court, and on the 9th of August 2018, his case was heard. It was found that he was deprived of the capacity to know he ought not to do the acts in relation to all of the charges, therefore the charges against him were discontinued. He was ordered to be treated in the park, and a non-revocable forensic order for 10 years was imposed.
That's a long time. But I guess that's a prison sentence.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that was the longest time that the judge could impose.
Oh, that's
So it was
interesting.
like it was
I
the
would have thought
maximum.
life sentence not permitted?
No, I think they probably would then reassess you,
Yeah.
and then maybe put another one in place.
Or
Right.
just say you're not fit for.
discharge at that
Discharge,
point.
yeah.
Okay.
Her Honour noted that Anthony had a poor prognosis and remained very ill and very dangerous. A specific review into the care and treatment provided to Anthony was commissioned following Manmeet's death, and this was called the Mullen Review. The investigators formed the view that Manmeet's death was a tragedy that could not have been predicted. It was acknowledged that had different decisions been made at certain times during Anthony's treatment, the attack may not have happened. However, the investigators were unable to conclude that any issues to do with the handover of information between services, management of risk, management of discharge from the service, and the handling of Anthony's attempt to re-engage with the service would have changed the outcome. So they're sort of saying there are things that, if they were done differently, meant this wouldn't have happened, but there wasn't any one specific thing that meant that this was inevitable.
Yeah. Okay.
Which I understand, because it wasn't that he was targeting that individual.
Yeah.
There was no specific plan for that individual. There was no specific plan
In
for
general.
anybody.
Yeah.
Yeah. The investigation recognised the importance of risk assessment in identifying factors which may suggest an individual is at a higher risk of committing violence. Clinician interviews noted that there was generally low confidence and satisfaction found with the current mental health risk screening tool. One of the most robust critiques of the current approach was a disconnect between risk assessment and risk management. While there was widespread use of risk screening, there was little evidence of more comprehensive risk assessment being conducted, even when the consumer had a history of violence. The investigation found that the engagement with Anthony appeared from the clinical notes to be, at times, less than optimal, and this would have impacted on the adequacy of the risk management. It was stated, quote, "There is little to suggest that the team regarded Mr. O'Donoghue's mental disorder as something unusual and outside of the experience of any of the clinicians involved in his care. This despite some of those interviewed acknowledging unfamiliarity with the specifics of his condition."
So what, they're just saying it's not that different to like every other patient that we treat with a delusional disorder or schizophrenia.
Or suicidal ideation.
But when actually questioned, they were like, I don't really know what was actually his particular delusion, or I don't really know how comfortable I am treating that kind of illness.
Yeah, I think it was more to do with they didn't see his particular disorders as being out of the realm of what they would normally do, but they also weren't super knowledgeable of like the specifics of his delusions and his condition. It was found that there was a limited pursuit of a comprehensive forensic assessment. In Anthony's case, the only evidence of involvement with forensic liaison officers was in the Community Forensic Outreach Service letter, which never actually made its way to Metro Health South. And these officers had no identified role in his management. So even though that risk assessment had been done, it wasn't then passed on to his actual treating team.
Do I ask why, or do we just move on?
Yeah, it didn't go into why. In terms of Anthony's risk of violence, given the nature of his delusions and intention to seek retribution, investigators considered that his treating team did not give sufficient weight to the potential severity of any apprehended violence. While he may at times have been assessed as a low probability of acting violently, the apprehended violence, should he do so, would have been likely to be severe. He's not saying that, I want to go punch this unionist in the head. He's saying, I want to go and kill them.
Yeah.
Like, even if they don't think he's going to do it, if he did...
But that's such a hard, like, low probability, high risk.
Yes. Investigators noted that Anthony's clinical notes over the 5 years after his initial admission indicated that he continued to express the same intentions with regard to suicide and harboured the same delusional conviction about persecution and desire for retribution towards public servants. So a medium to high risk of aggression and a medium risk of suicide remained unchanged throughout his period of care. Despite this, his recorded level of risk did change and was assessed as gradually decreasing.
Yeah. It was until he was...
Until it wasn't.
Yes, but also, like, until he was not being closely monitored anymore.
Yeah, and then they've got no idea what his risk is because they're not engaging.
True.
Yeah, and it's like one of those things of, was it only decreasing because he was still being monitored? Like,
yeah.
You can't even know that answer of, like, what made it change or whether it truly changed or whatever in between. But it certainly sounds like the more engagement there was, the better and more stable he was doing. And so the no longer seeing is a really hard one. Fine, maybe it's not them specifically, but someone needed to have been keeping regular contact with this individual.
Yeah, absolutely.
To the point where now they're saying he can't, for at least the next 10 years, not have mental health supervision.
And he's not allowed into the community for the next 10 years. Like, not even just he can live in the community and have supervision. It's that he is removed from the community for the next 10 years. The investigators considered the circumstances around the decision to stop the involuntary treatment order. The question was whether there was a legal basis to maintain the order, considering that Anthony had been attending appointments, was cooperating with the case manager, and was believed to be taking his medication. But the investigators did note that his compliance was only partial because he refused to cooperate with the forensic evaluation and an external psychiatrist. He also refused to allow contact with his GP or his family and friends for collateral information. So he was engaging in some ways, but also refusing in other ways. The investigators noted that, quote, it appears the treating team became somewhat used to working within the boundaries set by Mr. O'Donoghue, that they ended up seeing this as him being compliant and cooperative.
Okay.
So they essentially got used to the fact that he was refusing some things but accepting others, and so they ended up interpreting that as him being compliant.
He realised how to use the situation and use the system.
Possibly.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah. They also considered the decision to discharge Anthony from the Continuing Care West Team service. When the decision was made, he had engaged actively in a long-term period of care and seemed to be relatively stable. Investigators concluded that the decision was reasonable based on the clinical situation at the time. However, it would have been better managed by making full communication with his GP a condition of the discharge.
Absolutely.
Because then he would have had continuing care.
Could not agree more.
Yeah. The investigators noted that discharging a long-term patient without ensuring any viable transfer of care, ongoing support and treatment could not be regarded as best practice.
Absolutely.
There were clear indicators that Anthony was anxious about losing this support, which he had relied on for over 3 years. This seems to have been missed by the clinicians, which the investigators deemed an oversight.
Yeah, I can see how that could slip through the cracks.
The Mullen report did not make any adverse findings against individual clinicians or other Queensland health officers. Anthony's care was found to have been broadly compliant with legislation and the broad parameters for service delivery. Where deficiencies were identified, they were due to the prevailing culture, practices, and protocols within the service. So it wasn't his case specifically, it was...
Yeah, I wonder what the culture and service was otherwise like. That's an interesting statement.
After the Mullen review, Metro Health South completed their own investigation into the prevailing culture, risk management activities, and service leadership within its mental health services. This investigation did not find any specific deficiencies that suggested that staff, current and future clients, and the community at large were at any higher risk of tragedy than in any other mental health service in Australia, which I find an odd benchmark. It's not that we're really good, it's that we're not worse than others.
I agree. I think that is a concerning benchmark.
I didn't really understand that statement. I guess you have to compare yourself against someone, but it seems odd to say that we're not worse than other people, therefore it's okay, when really everyone could possibly do with being improved.
Yeah, if it had been prefaced with Australian mental health care is one of the best in the world, and we're within those parameters, then I'd appreciate it more than we're just not worse than others.
Yeah, basically. However, opportunities for improvement were identified and 22 recommendations were made. I won't go through all of them because there's too many. But the main themes were around better risk management and improving collaboration within the service and also between services.
Yeah, okay. Because it's so disjointed if they're not, that forensic stuff never got to Metro South. And then he jumped around all the different services and whatever.
Yep.
Yeah.
Coincidentally, in May 2015, the Mental Health Sentinel Events Review was announced, which aimed to consider homicides and attempted homicides involving people with a mental illness, as well as fatalities as a consequence of police use of force interventions where the person may have had a mental illness.
Okay.
So this was even before
this
all
happened.
of this
Yeah.
happened. In September 2016, the report was released, which described the current forensic mental health service system as, quote, decentralised and fragmented.
Yes.
With aspects of the health service system located administratively in 6 different health services.
Can we just apply this to Australian healthcare in general?
Yeah, I think so. This was obviously specific to forensic mental health service, but
I just don't think that's particularly different to the rest of Australian healthcare.
Yeah. It included concerns in relation to the assessment of risk of violence and the provision of appropriate treatment options. It was recommended that an integrated statewide forensic mental health service be established.
Oh, okay. Please go on.
Other recommendations focused on risk assessments and management, mental health assessments, collaboration between services, and the creation of a statewide mental health quality assurance committee to oversee the safety and quality of mental health services. So the Queensland Health response included a number of actions. Creation of an options paper to analyse existing systems and processes, a review of the core documentation within the statewide standardised suite of clinical documentation, and a clinician user guide to help with the use of these documents, which was begun in early 2016 and completed in March 2017. A 12-month project was undertaken to develop statewide clinical documentation and guidelines on a 3-level risk assessment framework. In addition, this was supported by enhancements to risk assessment and management training. A violence risk assessment management framework for mental health services was implemented by June 2019.
Oh, cool.
The framework provides mental health services with a systematic 3-tiered approach for the identification, assessment, and management of consumers who pose a risk of violence towards others, and is supported by principles of good practice, clinical tools, and training. So the Mental Health Act 2016 came into effect on the 5th of March 2017, along with a chief psychiatrist policy for the treatment and care of forensic order, treatment support order, and high-risk patients. It provides governance arrangements and escalation pathways for treating teams and clinical directors to review the treatment and care being provided to high-risk consumers. So obviously all of that was already in train at the time of this happened, yeah.
But if it's still relatively new, you're still kind of getting to terms with it.
Yeah. And so there have been a few other changes made by Metro Health South. A memorandum was circulated to all staff, reiterating the need for regular communication with GPs, with a reminder about the Queensland Health Guideline, information sharing between mental health workers, consumers, carers, family, and significant others, as well as the other possible actions that can be taken if a consumer refuses information sharing with GPs or external providers.
Yeah, I feel like you possibly only would have had a legal right if they were involuntarily under an order. Otherwise, they still have the right to consent.
Yeah. But then not discharging from the service until they consent.
Yeah.
Is a route they could have taken. One they probably do now.
Yeah, okay.
A brochure was developed to assist consumers who are being discharged from the service about how to re-engage. The relevant procedure was updated, and the requirement that consumers now have the ability to contact their treating team directly within 6 months of being discharged.
Okay.
Yeah, because, like, presumably the only way to otherwise have re-engaged would be to visit your GP, which we know we didn't have, or present to a emergency department for acute episode, at which point he would have been referred back as well, which just has, like, so many issues with it in terms of utilising an emergency service if you don't actually have an emergency.
Yeah.
But also then wait times and, yeah, so many other barriers.
Yep. A 24-hour telephone mental health clinician-led call service has also been introduced to give consumers an opportunity to seek assistance. So it doesn't need to just be within working hours.
Yeah.
Which is good. So a consultant psychiatrist provided an expert opinion for the inquest on the adequacy of the mental health care and treatment provided to Anthony. Her opinion was that the care provided was reasonable up until the decision was made to discharge him. She noted that it seemed the staff had a better therapeutic relationship with Anthony than they appreciated, which had perhaps served to contain his delusional thinking and behaviour during the course of treatment. And that's sort of what you said before, that him engaging with this service was helping him, and they didn't necessarily appreciate that the engagement was helping him.
Yeah.
That he would go downhill if they were not engaging.
Yeah.
His anxiety about discharge, his dismissal of other sources of treatment, and his attempt to re-enter the service, coupled with a lack of communication with his GP, all pointed to an opportunity lost at the time of discharge. She noted that the importance of having a proper discharge process from public mental health services. In terms of the changes to this process made after Manmeet's death, while some of the guidelines have been useful, they do not provide any guidance to clinicians about referring patients to the private sector for those who would benefit from longer-term management. However, changes made to allow patients to re-engage with the service via their previous treatment team, as have been implemented, do serve to address the possibly missed opportunity in Anthony's case.
Yeah. He wouldn't have been able to, like, engage in private care, surely.
No.
The costs would have been prohibitive.
Too high.
I'm making some assumptions based on the fact that he didn't have stable housing.
Yeah, I believe he's on a disability support income.
Yeah, okay.
In terms of the changes that have been made to the mental health system following Manmeet's death, she noted that while such changes were worthwhile, others, such as the need for a standalone forensic mental health service, did not rectify the shortcomings raised in the case. This was primarily because Anthony was not a forensic patient, and it was unlikely that he would have met the criteria for that management.
Up until he committed the crime.
Yes, that's the hard part.
Yeah, you're not a forensic patient until you do something enough to become a forensic patient is not really a good argument.
Yeah. She reiterated that cases involving persons such as Anthony are very rare, and considering clinical decision-making in such cases must be done with hindsight bias in mind.
Yeah.
Which makes sense. We know in this case that he did murder someone.
Yeah.
And so we then apply that lens to all of his medical history.
You know, as you were talking about it, you're like, they said it was low risk, because again, we come back to the probability was low.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because he continually talked about wanting to harm himself and others
But never
without ever
did it.
actually doing it.
And without ever having a specific plan.
Yeah, and I think that that's not as uncommon in the community as people might think.
Yeah.
That there are people out there that have lots of thoughts of generally more commonly harming themselves than harming others.
Yep.
And that with management, even though those thoughts are there, the probability still remains low.
Yep.
And hence why mental health is so hard to work in, because you spend all day having to do this risk calculation around that probability, and that you don't always get it right.
Yeah. And so one thing she also said was that risk assessment does not equate to risk prediction in terms of homicidal and violent behaviour, and she didn't think that it was foreseeable that he would go on to commit an act of violence.
Okay. That I struggle with. I think it's not unforeseeable, but the fact that it was that extreme for me was the bit that I wasn't expecting.
Yeah.
Given the story, we're not the treating clinicians, we're not doing the formal review, etc. But a verbal assault or a physical assault without other weapon was kind of more my thinking of what might happen rather than
rather than this level of violence.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now we'll talk about Brisbane City Council bus safety. Prior to October 2016, the Brisbane City Council had a range of measures in place for bus operator and passenger safety. This included panic alarms for operators, silent alarms for operators, anti-shatter windows, a physical barrier at the rear of the cabin area, critical incident response, security guards on some services, and emergency exits and releases. After Manmeet's death, several changes were made. Emergency exit signage was upgraded throughout the bus fleet, and this was completed in August 2017. An education program for bus passengers about emergency procedures, including the location of emergency exits, was rolled out on the 16th of November 2017. The driver training program was expanded in June 2018 to better equip drivers to respond to violent situations. An additional emergency exit was installed in the rear of all buses, which do not have rear window emergency exits. 706 buses required a third emergency evacuation exit. This was completed by June 2018. The council has also put in place a number of other changes, including installation of driver's door latch exit decals so they can be identified quicker to improve the speed of exit in an emergency. New photoluminescent material for internal emergency exit decals. External emergency door release buttons to be flush with external panels to make them easier to identify and operate in an emergency. Change to specifications for advertising film to ensure appropriate emergency window functionality and compliance by allowing the glass to break effectively during an emergency evacuation.
Yeah, right, because they're all perforated decals, so presumably they break up if you
break the glass.
Yeah,
I think possibly before, if they were solid, the window was staying intact even when you're hitting it. The glass breaks, but the window doesn't actually move.
The decals,
Yep.
Was there concern that Manmeet couldn't escape the driver area?
Not in this case, because the fire was so
quick and
severe.
devastating.
So I think not in this case, but they sort of identified it as if something
risk.
Like this that
they
possibly happened
proactively
again.
did things.
They did, yes.
Oh my, that wouldn't have necessarily been specific to this case, but
correct.
Incidents in general.
Yes.
Oh,
That's
look
nice,
at that.
isn't it?
As you were going through this, I'm like, none of that sounds like it would
like
have
it's
made a
relevant
difference
here.
Not in this
case.
No.
But it's so nice to see that they then went, okay, well, what are our risks? What are our concerns? What are our downfalls?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, how can we improve bus driver safety?
But also passenger safety, because realistically, this did happen to the driver, but could have escalated to the passengers.
Yep, absolutely.
And they identified they couldn't get out of the rear doors.
Well, yeah, they couldn't.
They couldn't effectively easily open them as far as they could tell.
They panicked.
Rightly so.
I would be too.
Yep. Closed circuit television has been fitted in all buses, and there actually was CCTV in this bus when it happened.
I mean, good, but also,
they had footage of that. Council finalised the installation of a partial driver protective barrier on its buses in December 2020 and has continued to investigate protective barriers.
Why was that protective barrier inserted, Alice? COVID.
Oh. Oh, yeah.
That was the Perspex barriers that got inserted in
Yeah.
every single location ever in 2020.
Right, yeah, I
The
didn't even think about that.
Perspex skyrocketed.
In September 2020, a driver's door and security screen specification was developed for inclusion in future bus procurement. On the 14th of December 2021, the Transport Minister approved driver barriers as mandatory on new buses. Delivery partners such as Brisbane City Council had the opportunity to seek funding from TransLink to retrofit existing buses with safety barriers. All Brisbane City Council buses and around half of the Caboolture bus line's fleet were fitted with barriers by June 2020. All other delivery partners had installed barriers outside of that scheme. So up to 90% of Queensland's contracted urban bus fleet now have a safety barrier installed.
Yeah, and I think with there being like less and less cash payments on buses now as well, that's really like less of a barrier to its implementation, because I think previously it was like, well, then how are you going to receive cash and deal with that scenario? And I think as that's less of a problem, that's going to make it easier to essentially enclose the bus driver completely.
Yes, and that's what they're looking into. So in January 2023, the Queensland government announced $60 million of funding for full driver protection barriers, along with extra network officers to patrol public transport services on high-risk routes, and the Queensland Police Service would increase its focus on public transport services in the Brisbane metropolitan area.
Yeah, nice. I think that's absolutely reasonable to be protecting our bus drivers.
Yeah, and just other passengers as well.
True.
Like the general public.
Yeah.
So the coroner agreed with the submission from Manmeet's family that Anthony should not have been assessed as being low risk prior to discharge. To some extent, the risk assessments performed by that team were hampered by a lack of access to the clinical notes from his treatment at Metro Health North, including his history of violence and the persistence of his delusions.
Yeah.
However, the coroner did not agree that it could have been predicted that Anthony would have gone on to kill someone, particularly in the way that he did.
Yep.
The coroner did agree that the decision to discharge Anthony from the mental health service was not satisfactory. However, they noted that this conclusion is reached with some hesitation and only with the benefit of hindsight.
Yeah. He could have gone on to live his life.
Yes,
Yeah.
it may have been a perfectly reasonable decision if he didn't then go on to commit violence.
Yeah.
Consistent with the findings of the Mullen Review, the coroner was not able to conclude with any certainty that the systemic issues identified had any direct causal link to Manmeet's death. The coroner was satisfied that sufficient steps have been taken, both by Queensland Health and the relevant health services at the local level, to address the identified systemic shortcomings and areas for improvement identified. So, interestingly, the coroner did not make any formal recommendations in this inquest.
Wait, what?
Yep. So they considered the need for a link between private and public mental health services for consumers like Anthony, who require longer-term care for a serious mental health condition. However, based on the changes that Queensland Health have made, the fact that there are existing processes in place to support linkages between the public and private sectors, and the difficulties in finding individual private psychiatrists willing to take on the care of these patients, the coroner agreed with the submission from Queensland Health that the implementation of such a recommendation would not be an efficient use of resources, and better outcomes would be reached with continued support to follow best practice with respect to shared care and transition of care between providers.
Yeah, they've made some changes, but...
Yeah.
Look, the comment about private psychiatrists not wanting to take on these kinds of patients, I think, is not unreasonable in the context of private psychiatrists not wanting to take it on, but that it shouldn't be the sole responsibility of one person, but rather a big, large treating team for patients like this.
Yes.
Where they should be having psychologists, they should be having different staff members as well, because you're at risk of not getting complacent, but like, as you said, even in this team, for them to be so like relaxed with him that they started maybe losing sight of how formalized his care needed to be.
Yeah.
I think that would be really hard for a single sole individual to do.
Yeah, and so I think one of the things that was mentioning, I don't remember who mentioned it, was the thought that maybe there should be, from time to time when you've got a treating care team, a second opinion from another psychiatrist.
Yeah.
Not all the time, but occasionally, just to review the case, review the treatment, and make sure that it's still appropriate.
With these really rare cases like this.
Yes.
Like, we've had 2 cases of schizophrenia with delusions now we're up to like almost 90 episodes. That, unfortunately, is like a huge misrepresentation of how common this is.
Yeah.
And at least with the first person that we covered, I can't remember his name. His was an acute onset, new and treatable, to the point where by the time he reached conviction, he essentially was well managed. But the number of individuals that have unmanageable psychosis with homicidal delusions is exceptionally rare.
Yeah.
So to then be referring them on for a second review, as you said, semi-infrequently, that's not going to be a huge burden. I wouldn't have thought.
Yeah. The coroner found that the changes in relation to bus driver safety made by the Queensland Government and the Brisbane City Council are extensive and commendable. Because of these changes, the announced commitment of Queensland Government to fund full driver protection barriers, as well as extra network officers and a police presence on high-risk routes, the coroner made no additional recommendations for bus driver safety. And that one makes more sense to me. It sounds like Brisbane City Council was fairly proactive in terms of the changes they made.
Yeah.
It's obviously hard for them to predict what sort of risks their drivers might be at. I don't think they could have predicted that something exactly like this case would have happened.
Yeah, like it's probably predictable that the drivers were quite open access.
Yes, like it's predictable that they may be physically injured.
Yeah.
But
I also think then, like we've talked about before, of what the coroner can reasonably recommend as well. I think Brisbane City Council should be commended. They proactively did a whole bunch of things, but like it's not like the coroner could come out and be like, well, the isolation of the driver, but did you think about making sure the tyres are pumped up more?
Yeah.
You know, like it's unrelated to the case. So there's also limited that the coroner could actually further recommend in that.
Yep.
I get so delighted when I hear people do things proactively.
Yeah, it is really good.
Sad that you have to go through this, but I agree that in that instance it was very unpredictable.
Yeah, that specific scenario would happen.
I guess they could have been putting in barriers earlier, but
yeah,
it's a tradition that like you used to be able to sit and chat with the bus driver that's like somewhat frowned upon now.
And it was also, I think, noted that there are times where the bus driver does need to exit that little compartment. Like if they're helping
people on and off.
Yeah.
Like with the ramp that they manually put down for people who are in wheelchairs or need the ramp to get onto the bus.
Yeah.
So there still is an element of them having to get outside of that.
Yeah.
So there's still going to be risks there.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just thought this was a really interesting one. It was one that was in the media a lot when it first happened.
I remember it, yeah.
But also when you're saying like how it ended up being an inquest and that the coroner like ultimately decided it needed to be public health, halfway through I was like, wait, this person got criminally convicted. Like they don't always go to an inquest because it's not necessary because the criminal conviction is taking care of the issue. But yeah, all of the other discussion of like potential systemic issues is important to cover.
Manmeet's family absolutely pushed for this inquest because they did not believe that the treatment of Anthony was adequate.
Sufficient. Yeah, okay.
Because this obviously then happened to their loved one, so I think they were definitely pushing for an inquest, which is totally understandable.
Yeah. Very, very interesting.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us, everyone. We'll catch you next time.
See you later.
Bye.